Welcome to Foresight. My name is Dr. Nat J. Fuller. Artificial intelligence is a big business. According to reports from various market research firms, the global AI market size has valued at over 62 billion in 2020 and is expected to reach over 700 and 3,300 billion by 2027. AI technologies are presently being explored across various industries, including healthcare, finance, retail, manufacturing, and transportation. Companies leverage AI to improve productivity, decision-making, customer experience, and innovation. AI has diverse applications from natural language processing, computer vision, to machine learning and robotics. It is used for tasks such as predictive analytics, recommendation systems, autonomous vehicles, virtual assistants, fraud detection, and also personalized marketing. Significant investment and funding are flowing into AI startups and initiatives. Venture capital firms, tech giants, governments that allocate substantial resources to AI research, development, and commercialization. Companies are also acquiring AI startups to enhance their capabilities and offerings. As AI becomes more prevalent, awareness of ethical considerations, responsible AI practices increases. Companies are investing into ethical AI frameworks, fairness and bias mitigation techniques, transparency measures to ensure that AI is deployed responsibly and ethically. To discuss AI more deeply, I have an all-star guest, Mr. Steve Winkler, who is a Fortune 100 marketing leader with over 20 years of experience converting business challenges into effective marketing programs. Steve is a two-time Telly Award winner and has led transformational change and creativity brand on a global scale. He has vast experience in designing, processing, and implementing organizational structures to increase effectiveness and efficiencies within company and organizations. Steve, welcome to Foresight.
Hello, Nat. How are you today?
Awesome. I am great. Thank you for being on the show. I'm so psyched to have you here.
I'm excited to be here and look forward to having a discussion on AI.
Awesome, man. So let's jump into our first question. How can AI be integrated into business strategy, Steve?
So, it's a loaded question. And I think, first we need to talk about the rules. And the rules haven't yet been written. And they're going to be something that will dictate whether or not this gets implemented, but also how it gets implemented. So before we even get to the strategic level, I think we need to understand, what we're talking about in terms of AI. And I think for the most part, what we've become familiar with in general, what's made media highlight reels is generative AI, right? So the ChatGPTs, the Bard, now Geminis of the world, have really kind of taken over the conversation in almost every area of life and business. It's hard to run by somebody that hasn't either experimented with it or checked it out. But I don't think anybody understands it deeply. And I think this is where businesses have a responsibility and a challenge in front of them.
Right.
So before you even get into really integrating this in a business strategy, the rules need to be written. And who's going to write the rules, right? Is that an executive committee alone? Probably not, right? I think what is needed here are the key players in a few different areas. I think you need somebody that is deeply understanding of the ethics of AI.
Sure.
You need somebody that can manage the potential legal challenges that AI will present, right? And there's lots of them. And these are not areas that I'm an expert, but these are the areas that I think need to be addressed if you're going to write the rules for AI in general, but even more specifically for any particular business.
Sure.
What about security and data security? What about the human implications, right? Because what is the concern that many people have? AI is going to take my job. It's going to take over. It's going to become sentient. And I think that apocalyptic future is way down the road. I don't think we're anywhere near that yet, but we are on the verge of a revolution in many ways. And I kind of relate this to other revolutions that fundamentally changed life and work in ways that will never go back to the old ways. And I think this is one of those things.
Right.
So you need to bring that right group together. And I couldn't even tell you who all those people are right now. But I think if you think about any area that could be affected positively or negatively, that's who you need on your committee, right? But bring in the people that are going to use it as well, right? Have them have a say in it, right? Bring people in who have a voice in the fact they could be negatively impacted by it, and let them share their concerns.
Right.
Ultimately, this is a tool, right? Let's look at AI as nothing more than a tool, right? Your calculator doesn't make you a mathematician. Your copy of Photoshop doesn't make you a master photo or video editor, right? But what these are, if used in the right way, are enhancements or force multipliers. And I think that is really, there's so many things loaded in the question you asked of how you integrate this in business strategy. I couldn't even tell you, but I think first you need to write the rules. But then really from a practical standpoint, right? And I think we can look at this from a purely practical standpoint for the moment. And this is where my experience comes in.
Right. Right. Steve, you know what? I love
efficiency tool. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that answer. And the reason why I loved it is because you're right. It's a very broad question, but your answer was a very, what I call, it addressed the broadness, right? Because it's so broad, it almost sounds like this committee should be broad. It should be, not just computer scientists, not data scientists, not just computer engineers, not even a CEO. It should be a vast amount, or people with different roles and different aspects about the business to be on this committee. What do you is that really what you were saying, or, can you add to that a little bit more? So,
I think decisions made by a single person end up being a dictatorship. And I think this is not a situation where you need a mandate or a rule book written by one point of view. I think if we've learned anything about technology, as hard as we try to keep things democratic and equitable, I think the other side of this too, in bringing a committee together, is maybe sussing out some of the biases that could come in if a smaller group is in charge of writing that rule book. And I think we make better decisions with diversity. And I think in this situation, we have enough precedent to know that if we're going to do this the right way, there's lots of voices that need to be involved, lots of point of views that need to be involved. And some are right, some are wrong. And I think every group is going to figure out what that is. So eventually there'll be a consortium, there'll be a rule book, there'll be, some type of ethical guidelines for universal use of AI, but we're not there yet. So I think, it's going to require good people with a good moral foundation to get this started. And then from there, I think the sky's the limit, right? I think, you got to then, we'll get further into it, but that's when you can start to, explore its capabilities, but also understand its limitations. And all those things are going to wrap into how this makes sense for a business, and it will. That's what it's here for. It's the tool that we'll look back on a few years from now and say, do you remember when we had to, do analysis, manually? I had to look through a Excel spreadsheet to figure out what the pattern in the data was.
Sure.
It's really long gone.
That's awesome. That's great. No, I love it. Steve. So, hey, let's go to the next question. They're kind of relative, or it's kind of relative to the first question, but it's it's a little bit more deviation to it. In your thoughts, in your experience, what do you think the short-term and the long-term goals for AI implementation for businesses? And we can talk short-term first.
I'm actually going to go long-term first, because I think that relates to what we were just talking about. Long-term, this needs to be integrated into the business in a way that makes sense for the people that a business is responsible for, right? A corporation has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. It has, in some cases, right, or, in a good business, right, a responsibility to its employees and its customers. So I think long-term, how AI is implemented in the business needs to consider those bigger goals of business, right? I think in the short term, this is where it actually is even more fun. Over the past year in particular, as businesses are trying to find efficiencies, AI is the answer for a lot of those things.
Right.
I'm not sure how deep you've gotten into this, but give you an example. short term, if you think about the rather mundane, somewhat repetitive tasks that you have to do on a daily basis,
Sure.
it is pretty easy in most cases to rationalize a prompt, right? And for those who aren't familiar with AI, the prompt is not code, it's your natural language instructions that you give the chat platform to give you a result. And in this case, if you think about the things that you can do today, right, to experiment with its efficacy, find something that you know very well, because right now the human filter is the most important part. But think about, I don't know, let's just say you have to draft an email to your child's school, right? You saw a grade come back that you want to discuss. You could, of course, write that manually. It's going to be great. But imagine just throwing that prompt into ChatGPT or into Gemini and say, I need to write a letter to my child's teacher to address a grade lower than they're normally bringing home. Could we set up a time to talk, right? You've given it enough instruction to give you an email that probably is going to be even better and more complete and more grammatically correct than most of us have the time or patience to write. So those are simple things that you can use to test it. Then you look at the output. Does it make sense, right? And I think that's, of course, a very personal use of it. But I would say, the way of looking at it is the same for business, right? Is there something that you could use AI for in your day-to-day business? And I think, just writing email drafts, right, is just a great way to experiment, because you know what you would write anyway. Right. Will this save you time? Will it take me 30 seconds to write the prompt versus 5 minutes to write the email? Boom, 4.5 minutes back in your day, multiplied by what, 10 emails? It's 20 emails. You've got hours back. Multiply that over a week, a year. You see where I'm going, right? These are the little things that are the short-term goals for AI. And
that's a great example. I think, Steve, just to add a little bit, because you get me excited here. I think the email is a great use case that you bring in, because there's been various studies out there that show cognitive overload with vast amounts of emails. People are kind of, looking through and trying to make sense out of it. So, I just love that use case and that example that you just kind of introduced here. So I guess what you're saying is you consider email to be one of those short-term wins, right, for AI, right?
It's an example. I think really the bigger picture in the short term is if somebody wants, if a business or even an individual wants to understand how it could work for them, it needs to be in an area that they have some domain knowledge. Because if you can't discern whether the output is better than what you would do or worse than what you do, or indiscernible from what you do, you're in a disadvantage, because you need that perspective in order to be able to understand whether or not the output is accurate, is ethical, is helpful, or detrimental, right? You still need to be the human and the brains in order to be able to make that determination.
Right.
Because look, sometimes the outputs are not great, and they warn you that that's the case. Right. So you need to be able to have that filter. But that's the same in practical personal uses as for business. I think as businesses in the short term set goals, they need to look at those tasks, those repetitive things, those systematic or even rather programmatic areas of business that don't need a lot of human interpretation. Once you get to a prompt that gives you a reliable result, and I think that's it. So if you think about how you experiment with it, if you without memory in your chats, you might get a different answer every time you ask a question. Right. That's not a good result, right? You need consistency and quality in order to be able to have confidence that it actually is on your side.
Right. No, that's awesome, Steve. And, and honestly, Steve, I like the way you talked a little bit, we talked about the committee in the first, question here within Foresight. And then I like the way you linked the committee to long-term, because I didn't really understand or didn't really see that correlation until we just kind of discussed it between us two. That committee really should have a lot of input into those longer term goals, right? Because that will kind of, dictate, profit lost, which we're going to talk about that later in a few other questions, but just how well the AI can help the company, not only gain profits, but also gain, people, right? And keep the company really healthy. So that is great, man. So, hey, question three, and you touched on it just a little bit here. So I want to throw it at you now while, you're still thinking about it. Um, how do we identify and really prioritize AI use cases that align with business objectives?
I think efficiency right now is an easy way to find use cases that make sense, that are rather easy to implement.
Gotcha.
So you brought up a different perspective on email. You're right. I'm used to having an inbox that has, at the end of the day, many unread emails, right? And how do you go through those in a way that it shows the people that are sending the message that you care enough to read and reply, but do it in a way that actually works within the tight schedules we already have, right?
Sure.
We generally don't have a block of time dedicated to responses when our days are back-to-back meetings. So what if, and it's easy to do it, you just cut and paste the body of an email into your chat, right? And ask it to summarize the question and even give you a very brief response, right? I wouldn't suggest sending that without reviewing it first. But again, if you're saving 2-3 minutes per email and you get 30 emails, look, that's time you probably otherwise wouldn't have. And look, communication is important. And if you're able to get back to people in a more timely manner with a more complete answer and understand, perhaps a long email from somebody in simple form, right? These are just easy, practical ways to do it. But again, I don't want to make this about email. It's certainly much broader than that. Just an easy use case, right, to talk about. But efficiency in general.
No, I love it. I love it. And as you're kind of going through that, I was thinking about, particularly the validation aspect of doing that with email, right? Because you definitely want to, I would imagine there's certain use cases where you definitely want to validate it prior to you hitting the send button, right? Particularly like if I'm sending something to my wife or I'm sending something to my boss or something like that. So there'll probably have to be like multiple, validations and verification that needs to happen if we were to actually do that. But no, Steve, I love the email only because it's low hanging fruit, right? And that's what I call, right? It's one of those things where I think it could be simply implemented. It makes business sense in terms of trying to reduce the amount of cognitive overload, particularly with email and things of that nature. And then you're putting the user in the position where, okay, look, go through my email and, once I train you, the algorithm, to understand what's important to me, then you will then tell me what's important. And then, oh, by the way, I'll also train you what responses to provide back to my actual person that sent me the email, right? So it's actually learning your preferences, which, you touched on a very great point. You said, make it personal, right? Because we're all different. We're all unique, which that's what makes us great, right? Is that we all have different perspectives. But I love the way you said, hey, you need to really make the AI experience personal, particularly if we're talking users in a company, because everyone has their different perspective, the different ways they like to be presented. I love the email. I love the fact that, identify that in terms of, low-hanging fruit and implement it in terms of that way to really understand business objectives. What else, Steve? Do you have any other thoughts in terms of aligning business objectives to AI?
Well, let me ask you, right? I mean, you see this from, of course, the perspective of your business.
Right.
What have you thought about in terms of use cases in your own business where AI could make a difference in
so one of the things,
your efficiency or productivity?
Right. I'll kind of jump in and talk a little bit about, I'll kind of, jump on top of your email example, right? Like what you really see now in terms of just on the computer science aspect of it is generating software code, right? And because every person that develops or every person that writes software, everyone has a different way of doing it. And then certain people are stronger than others. I'm certainly no expert in terms of writing code, even though I can write code. But wouldn't it be cool to have an AI recommender or some type of agent assist you whenever you're writing code, and it's actually monitoring you as you're writing. And then when you write something that's not, correct in terms of the syntax, in terms of how it's written within a method or class, or if you're violating some type of security rule, right? The AI agent says, hey, that particular code that you just wrote, that line is not correct. And let me tell you why, right? So it's giving you the why. And then it's telling you, hey, I would do it this way, right? So it actually offers you a alternative to the way you're writing it. And then at that point in time, and this gets to what your point was, Steve, the person or the individual is still in the decision making mode, right? Because they're looking at what the error was. So they can say, oh, you know what, where did they get that from? And then they can do their own research to see whether or not the AI is really, legitimate or not. And then once it provides the actual recommendation, then you can say, you know what, they're right. Because everything that I've been reading in terms of maybe some, journals or articles or just best practices says that that's the way I should do it. So, hey, thanks, AI. You just made me better, and you just prevented this system from maybe becoming compromised because you gave me the proper way of writing this particular code sequence. So, to me, that's, both the email and software coding, those are like very similar in terms of their use cases, making me a better developer, better efficiency in terms of creating code. In your use case, making me a better reader of email and not necessarily have to concentrate on stuff that's spam or things that is not relevant to me, but those things that I really care about. So what do you think about that? You think those are?
I think you just touched on something that really, I glossed over, which is that these are chats, these are conversational, and that this isn't simply black and white input output, right? Sure. I think if you, for folks that don't know these tools as well, perhaps as I do, you're having a chat, right? That's why it's called Chat GPT, right? I think the chat is the real the interface, and that is something that isn't familiar to most people, right? Because to your point, it can understand context. And I said, yeah, right. These generative AI tools can understand context. It has a large frame of reference, right? It's got a pool of data that it pulls from. And now it can do live searches as well to find, new and up-to-date information. So, but to be able to get feedback too, right, is something that is part of that conversation, right? It's a question you can ask for feedback. It might provide it to you. It might give you context when it provides an answer. All those things are important, right? Rather than just getting it. Look, if you want an answer to something, right, give me the definition of a word, right? You put that into Google, you're going to get that back. And it's very input output. And this gives often a little bit of context and information that's helpful. And to your point, it can be a great learning tool.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point.
Yeah, no, I love it. Which leads into our next question, right? What training or upskilling programs can be implemented to empower employees to work with AI technologies, right? So, you said, hey, great training tool. I totally agree with you, right? Like, and I think even within academia, at least from my optic, you're starting to see more AI being implemented into things like, for example, writing, right? Again, kind of getting back to my code example, I'm writing a white paper for my particular class. And as I'm writing the white paper, again, I may use, a wrong verb in a wrong, position within my sentence, right? And then the AI comes up and says, hey, you know what? It'd be better for you to maybe write it this way, right? It sounds much more, it's grammatically correct, number one, and it's a little bit more positive, right? And so now it's like, oh, wow, they're looking at it, or AI is looking at it from a grammar perspective, but it's also looking at it from the perspective of the actual instructor or the person who's going to read your document. What impact or what effect will it have once they read it? So it's almost being used as, they call it recommendation systems, but it's also training you how to kind of be maybe a better writer and really understand your audience, as you're writing. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I have a few thoughts. So to answer your question, right, I think the training and upskilling programs have not all yet been defined. I think there are some easy ways to get familiar with it, which is the first step. Just understand what it is. And LinkedIn Learning has utilities. A lot of the companies that tie into things like LinkedIn Learning, it would give you a very good fundamental understanding of what it is and how it's to be used.
Right.
Then I would say the rules we talked about, early on in our conversation,
Right.
need to be clear and understandable and written in a language that isn't legalese, that give people enough latitude to be able to use it, but clear guidelines on what it can be used for and what it can't be used for, or what information can go in and what should never go in. I think until we know more about how walled gardens can be created around different businesses' instances of these platforms, it's probably it's probably in everybody's best interest not to put in, sensitive customer data, PII, or anything that could, if it leaked, right, cause a headline to appear that would not be positive. So I think the rules need to be there, right? So give everybody a good understanding of what they can and can't do with it. But try not to restrict any more than necessary. Let people explore and experiment. And I think the best way to use these platforms is to use them and just learn from them. Yes, you can learn how to engineer prompts and better ways of doing that. Yeah, there's some good knowledge to be had there. But at the end of the day, when this is going to be most effective for the mass of people within an organization is when they're able to understand it and learn it in a way that they would learn their normal language that they speak, right? You learn it in little bits, you try, you fail, you say something wrong, you get it right? And I think that's the best introduction for most people into this, right? To see how it's applicable to what they do. There's another thing that you mentioned there too, which is, what we also have with all of this is a opportunity to test what, I guess the best way to say it is, what its limitations are. And I think that is that's more powerful than knowing what its capabilities are.
Yeah.
I think those things allow us to not only train ourselves, but build our own custom GPTs, which if you have a subscription to ChatGPT, right, you can build your own GPTs, which gives you the ability to do something that I think is important. If you're just using, let's go back to the email example, writing an email like that, right? The output it'll give you is a very ChatGPT robotic way of talking, unless you build the prompts to say, I need it to have character. I want it to have a little tongue-in-cheek humor. I want it to have a light tone, right? I don't want to use unnecessary words, right? Or say, no, I'm a heavy jargon user in my day-to-day life, and that's what people know me for. Here are 50 papers I've written. You can put those into ChatGPT in one of your custom GPTs. It will learn from those. And if you work within your own GPTs, it continues to learn. So yes, you could have it write an email for you, and it's probably pretty good, grammatically correct, great, right? But is it you speaking? And I think that is where people will find it's also a real benefit is, working within it long enough, giving it the right inputs so that it isn't a different version of us. It's a version of us that sounds like us, that feels like us, so that when someone reads an email, it's like, wait, who wrote that? That wasn't Steve, right? That's not how he writes. That's not how he talks. So I'm aware of that. And I think that's why when you do it the right way and you let it learn and you teach it properly, it will be a reflection of who we are.
That's awesome. So what key performance indicators should be tracked to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of AI?
So I'm going to come back to, in the short term, let's talk about efficiency and productivity.
Okay.
So I think that's going to depend on the task you're doing and how you would measure a normal input in regular human hours versus the assistance of AI. And I think, that's a good way to prioritize what tasks could be first used or leveraged against AI. And I think those are the KPIs. So I think beyond that, it's tough, right? For me to just say broadly what the KPI should be. They're going to be very task oriented or very goal oriented based on what you're using it for.
Right.
Again, it's like what are the KPIs of using my calculator, right? Well, if I don't have to do long division, I've just saved a few minutes of time, right? And probably more accurate in my answer than if I were just to scratch it on paper while I'm thinking about 10 other things, right? So.
Sure. Yeah. And you know what? And Steve, I'll just kind of add to that statement and love to get your thoughts on it. You know, I kind of see KPIs as being very unique to every business, right? Like they're like from a broad perspective, you know, time, right? Which I totally agree with you. You're right on the money with that. Efficiency. Yeah. Very broad KPIs. But I would imagine, you know, and love to get your thoughts on this. Like as you start getting into like some of the bigger companies, and even when you start getting into some of the smaller companies, like some of small businesses, right? You know, because we can't forget about them. I would imagine that the KPIs would be very fine-tuned or very specific to that business. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for sure, right? As a data-driven marketer, as someone who grew up in the world of performance marketing, KPIs rule the day, right? That's how we profess how good we are or how bad we are at something, and where we, you know, say this is a win or this is a loss, right? And where we can improve. So yeah, KPIs are critical. I'm not saying they're not. I think though, as I think about AI, I don't know how to attribute KPIs or assign KPIs yet to AI itself. I think the outputs are where those come in. And a good example too, and something I think everybody should start to explore is the analysis capabilities of some of these generative AI tools, right? Feed in a spreadsheet of dummy data, right?
Right.
Let's keep it at a high level, right?
Right. Sure.
And see what insights can be, derived from that. And then, right, maybe you've already done that yourself, and that's maybe a good task. Do this manually. One, see how long it takes you. See if you can find, right, the patterns, anomalies,
Right.
answers, insights, right, from that data.
Right.
And if you do, put those down on a piece of paper and then run it through AI and see if it matches what you're doing, but maybe even see something that you didn't see, right? Can you put multiple data sets together and do it that way? Now, again, there are professionals that do this for a living, BI professionals, people that work in analytics, right? This is their job, and I'm not claiming to say that this will be better than any of them, but I can tell you my own experience in exploring these capabilities, I was utterly blown away. And in fact, when I shared this with folks that do work in BI and data, they were equally amazed at how good this gets to an answer that would have taken a lot of time and a lot of experience to get to. So,
no, that great, awesome perspective there. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, Steve. I love the whole trial and error perspective that you're taking here, because you're right. I don't think there's a exact science behind this, right? Because of the fact that we are talking, artificial intelligence, technology, human technology, learning from the human. Guess what? We're not perfect. So what we don't want to do is take our, bad stuff that we do or the errors that we do and then pass it on to an AI algorithm, right? We want to try to pass on our best qualities, what we do, in terms of the best things or the great things that we do, not the mistakes, right? But to your point, I do think AI, it's really good to fail fast with AI, right? And I think that's really what you're saying, right? Fail fast, find out why it failed, make corrections, make iterations, move on, right? And then move on to the next iteration. You fail again, which is great. You're going to fail. Figure out what those issues are, revise, reiterate, move the model on. So yeah, I was just sitting here just really, about to do a cartwheel as you were kind of saying that. Cause I'm like, yeah, man, everything that I thought was true is true in terms of that statement you made. All right, Steve, I could talk with you for another 6 hours, man, but here's the last question for you, right? How can we continuously optimize AI solutions toward maximizing the value and achieve the sustainability, competitive advantages within our companies? So how do we keep doing this? How do we keep making AI better?
Yeah, I think, again, there's an order of operations here, right? First, let's get the rules out, right? Let's make sure that there's a rule set that everybody could live with, but then, within each business, find out what the implications are, both
Right.
positive and negative, right? For use of AI, where it makes sense, where it doesn't, where the business is ready to use it, and where it might need to hold off. And again, right, my perspective is mostly based on generative AI, but AI has already had benefits in a lot of products companies make, right?
Sure.
Like AI enhanced software, it's not a brand new thing, right? There are tons of applications, right, that AI has already jumped into active analysis of situations of experiences people have with technology and make them better on the fly in real time. So I think that there's that side of it, and that's already deeply ingrained in some product lines and some businesses. I think how those keep getting better, right, is learning, right? And the good thing about this, when machine learning is also a part of it, it should ultimately get better. I think the other side of this too is we need to keep looking at this from a standpoint of equity and how well it serves people broadly. I think we've seen that algorithms often carry the biases of who we are as humans.
Sure.
How much of that have we not seen yet in these tools, right? So how do we make it better in the future? Let's be honest and find ways to either program AI to do something that humans are bad at doing, which is being completely objective, right? Can
Right.
you imagine just a completely objective platform? But will that work? Will that be human? It probably wouldn't. So how do you balance then, the best parts of being human with
Exactly.
extracting our biggest flaws, which
Sure.
are biases and things that get in our way of being fair and open and inclusive. And I think that's where I don't think a lot of people are really talking about where AI needs to go, but I think that's the conversation that needs to be had. And then from there, we just need to get better at it ourselves, right? Explore, experiment, understand its capabilities, but
Right.
be very comfortable with its limitations and understand where those are and either work around them or realize that this is an evolving technology and it might not be there today, but it's going to be there pretty fast.
Awesome. Hey, Steve, that was great. Steve, I'd like to thank you for being on Foresight. I will be sharing your contact information with all the Foresight audience, and so everyone will be able to get in touch with you to ask some additional questions. Steve, we're definitely going to have you on again. So I'd like to just thank you for being on Foresight.
My pleasure to be here, and I look forward to next conversation, whenever that is. And this is just one of many areas, right, related to business and marketing that I've had the pleasure and bandwidth to be able to explore. And this is just my perspective, right? I don't want to oversell myself as an expert, but I can tell you that in what I've seen, I can share these experiences with people from a purely practical standpoint, and I would say get others as fired up and excited about technologies as I am. And I think I'll close with this. And I mentioned this earlier, we're in a revolution right now, just
Right.
like the Industrial Revolution, just
Yep.
like the search revolution 25 years ago. We're now in an era where a lot of the way we used to think about work is going to change. And yes, it has negative implications for certain people and certain job functions. I think we need to be honest about that. But
Sure.
can those be the things that we don't really want to do or aren't the best use of our time and intelligence?
Right.
Because we have people that work in often very laborious, and dangerous jobs that are smart people that this could maybe be their way up the ladder, right? I think this is going to open up opportunities for people that didn't have them before. So
Right.
I think the big picture here is not looking at its, being understanding respectful of the negative implications, but really looking at the future of where this will impact lives for the better. And I don't have all those answers, Nat, and I don't know if anybody does. But I think if we're going to have great conversations about this topic, those are things we need to talk about.
Well, I think it starts with the committee. I really like that, Steve. And like I said, maybe, I think we'll have you on again to talk more about that committee idea. I just think that is just a very interesting business model to think about. And yeah, maybe that's something that we'll discuss in the next episode. So
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Steve. And for everyone, we'll see you on the next Foresight. Take care.
Cheers.